as he said, I'm Ian. I'm the cartographer for the Wyoming Migration Initiative, and I'm excited to share with you all today about the Atlas of Ungulate Migration. For a little bit of background context, if you don't know what ungulates are, generally the word refers to hooved mammals. There are some odd ones that don't exactly fit, but these are some of the ungulates you might see in Western North America, if you're lucky. And then migration is the regular seasonal movement between habitats. In the western US, we commonly see migration of ungulates between summer range and winter range. Summer in areas where there's more nutritious forage, usually in higher elevations, and then they travel to lower elevations in the winter to escape the harsher weather conditions. This is an important component of conserving our ungulate populations because it requires that they have large connected habitats to maintain healthy populations, like in the greater Yellowstone ecosystem. In other regions of the world, migrations can be driven by different factors, like in much of Africa, animals move more in relation to wet seasons and dry seasons. So now that you're all caught up on ungulates and migration, we can talk about the Global Initiative on Ungulate Migration, or GUM as we call it, which was the group that put together the Atlas of Ungulate Migration. So it's a group, it's a collaboration of biologists, conservationists, and mappers, including my Wyoming Migration Initiative and the great cartographers at the U of O InfoGraphics lab. And in GUM also includes a lot of very cool people who work on a lot of cool ungulates all over the world. These are just a few examples. GUM was initially formed in 2020. The foundation for it was laid out in this science article that was published in 2021 with the goals of creating a global atlas and inventory of ungulate migrations using tracking data and expert knowledge, and stimulating research on drivers, mechanisms, threats, and conservation solutions common to ungulate migrations worldwide. So, and the idea for this was that it would all be under the auspices of the UN Convention on the Conservation of Migratory Species of Wild Animals, which would be a way to host it under a more neutral and respected source. And it's a UN Environmental Program treaty that provides a legal foundation for internationally coordinated conservation measures, and they have a great website that has a bunch of mapping resources, including the Atlas of Ungulate Migration, because having a good map is a great place to start for actually conserving a migration. So after a lot of hard work, the Atlas of Ungulate Migration was released in September 2024 on the CMS website. It's not comprehensive of all ungulate migrations, but it is an ongoing effort. There have been 3 additional updates with new migratory populations since the initial release, to a total of 30 mapped migrations. There are many more to come as well. So we can jump into this recording to show you how it works. This beautiful web map interface was put together by the InfoGraphics lab. Thank you to them. So these little purple dots, those are the migrations. You can see what species they are. You can also jump over to the left side panel to look at the migrations organized by region or by species. We'll click on the elephant, and this is the development version, so it's a little bit slower. But there are the corridors that you can look at on the curated base map. You can also look at it with satellite view if you would like. And on the left-hand side, there's some information about the migration, about the threats to the migration, as well as the conservation status and where the data came from, and our partners who helped us compile that data or information. So it's just little tidbits on the left, so you can expand it by clicking on it and look at the whole paragraphs, the full data sources, and all that. And we really want people to click on those big dark buttons so that they can save the map for later. That's the static map that I work on. That's my part of the process. Or the fact sheet that has much of this information as well. There are a few other little things, like some additional species facts I also compile all of this into the fact sheets. That's my part of the process. Other than the species facts, it's a lot of the same information. There's a few other things on the second page with some more migration timing information and some additional information on the data set, like the study size, sample size, and other migration route information. And then these other purple dots are other migrations in the area you can click on. So here in Botswana, we have the most mapped migrations so far. There's plains zebra, as well as Cape buffalo. And you can also see those yellow lines are the veterinary fences that are very common in that region. And those are one of the larger constraints to migrations in that area. So yeah. That's just Botswana, so there's lots more to check out, but I will move on from here to talk about how we got here. Let's see. Pause that. Oh, yeah. So there are a lot of people who helped us make this possible. These are the logos of our partners, and the process really starts with them. They're the experts, the data collectors, the funders of data collectors, and all this data of the migrations has been voluntarily shared involving data sharing agreements that generally stipulate that we never share the raw data beyond GUM. So we only really show the derived representations, like the corridors that you saw. And how this works is our data analysis team gets the GPS points, usually from GPS collars that some animals will have, and then they select the migratory points for migratory individuals and get the migratory routes from there, which then can in turn be used to create the corridors through a Brownian bridge movement model analysis, which we break into a low, medium, and high use. And then I get to put that on a map. That's fun. Here's a very clear migration corridor for the zebra in Namibia and Botswana. They have their wet season range in the Nai pan and Makati pans, and the dry season range up north on the Zambezi River. But as much as we try to maintain a standardized process, not all cases allow that. So sometimes we can only show migration footprints like these red deer, either because the data is insufficient, migration is widespread or disjointed, or because high-use designations could bring increased hunting pressure to certain areas. And sometimes we can only show the routes as well, usually because the population or species shows nomadic movement tendencies rather than clear migration corridors. For example, the Mongolian gazelle make large, year-round movements across the landscape, more motivated by the unpredictable weather patterns of the Mongolian steppe. Another common map variation is the inclusion of seasonal ranges, which are just as vital to be conserved as the migration corridors. So, as you can see, there's a lot of flexibility in the design, and it's an important part of our mapping, because our work relies heavily on the expertise of the data providers. The data providers give us input on like the migration characteristics, some of the reference features for the maps, and the threats to the migrations as well. So in this example of the Tiang in South Sudan, the data providers helped with telling us to put the Sud wetland on there and certain roads, as well as the oil blocks, which are one of the primary threats in that region. And seasonal ranges were also developed with lots of input from the data providers. So in this earlier draft map version, we had these less organic seasonal ranges derived from the limited data, especially on the eastern side. Whereas in the final version, we have this more, it reflects this local knowledge of more continuous seasonal ranges, and it expands the eastern range to include data from aerial surveys and characterizes it as a suspected range. And for some fact sheets, there's actually more to the story than can be told with a single map, believe it or not. So we may expand the fact sheet to 3 or 4 pages with extra involvement from the data providers. For the Kulon, the data provider separated the data into 2 temporal categories: before and after the construction of railways through their range. and then pointed out select individuals from each subset that highlighted the impact of the infrastructure development. The first map shows the wide-ranging nomadic movements from 2013 to 2019. So as you can see, these Kulon are traveling hundreds of kilometers in a single year. And the primary obstruction at this point is the border fence between Mongolia and China. So later on, these railways were built in 2022, and we have less data for this time period since then, but even still, you can see how clearly those barriers affect their movements. They're very impermeable in a lot of places. And these additional maps are a key resource for our partners who are advocating for increased construction of wildlife crossing structures as places like Mongolia increasingly develop more linear infrastructure like railways and roads. So as I'm working on these fact sheets and maps, they near completion, the web map counterpart is designed to reflect those maps, those map designs. And the InfoGraphics lab does a great job. Here's one of those fact sheet maps that I would be putting together, and they have a beautiful web map version that has all the same things, plus it's interactive, super complicated, super cool. But Joanna will talk more about that in the next presentation, so stick around. And while we're on the white-eared cob in South Sudan, I will brag that it's the first time this migration has been mapped to this extent, which is, of course, made possible by our partners in Ethiopia and South Sudan. But it's been really helpful to them as well to use for educational purposes and hopefully mitigate threats that the migration faces. It was actually so well received that we were asked to follow up with a poster that shows the migration in greater detail, including additional threats as well. So if you want to go check that out in person, it's in the map gallery, and there's a lot of details to look at. Another map that has already seen value on the ground is our Serengeti wildebeest map. Currently, there's a lawsuit against the recently built Ritz-Carlton Masai Mara Safari Camp up there, and the lawsuit challenges the legality of its placement in the middle of the wildebeest migration corridor, right near the dry season range. So this map was actually used just last week in a court case to illustrate this concern. And we also had the chance to put together some additional maps that were used in court showing the high density of migratory routes within close proximity of the new camp location, as well as a closer look at its placement in the medium use corridor. So we haven't heard any results yet, but hopefully these maps will help them with their case. And yeah, our work, whoa. Well, that's all right. Our work goes on as we continue to fill in the map and respond to other ungulate conservation-related mapping needs as they arise. So in the meantime, feel free to check out the atlas for yourself. There's the beautiful QR code, and it is better on desktop, just so you know. But thank you.
Thank you so much, Ian. We do have time for questions this time, so if you have any question, I can go and find you. Okay.
I'll give you the mic.
Excited to see yours.
Hey, thanks for the presentation. I was wondering if you feel like the data availability for the migration routes allows for the predatory hunting camp emplacements, and if it outweighs the benefits of a migration map.
So in a lot of cases are you referring to the Masai Mara Safari Camp? Yeah.
Correct.
So that even is probably more of a photographic tourism camp anyways, and its placement is there because they know that there's a lot of migrations through there anyways. There's been a lot of mapping of that area. But in general, I would say that while that is a risk, most of our mapping makes the data available on this scale that you can't really see very precise locations that would put certain individual animals at risk. You're more of getting the broader look at the migration and the general areas that animals move through. So yeah, there's always a risk of increased pressures if we know, people want to go find these animals in certain places, but also a lot of conservation use.
Thank you so much. When I was in InfoGraphics, I participated in this project, so I'm really happy to see how it goes together.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Ian. Yeah, another round of applause.